Today we're going to be in the 11th chapter of the book of Daniel. This is an extremely controversial chapter, and we're going to find out why it is so controversial. We're going to make a statement and ask ourselves a question about that statement. And we're going to talk about the future today when we come right back. Hi, and welcome to Bible Study with Friends, where our goal is to help you get more impact from your Bible study. This is a real Bible study between friends, and I'm here with my friend Kyle Grinstead, and Kyle and I are going to continue in our study in Daniel. We're almost done. We're in the 11th chapter of the book of Daniel, and Kyle, I made a comment about this in the introduction, but this chapter is probably the most controversial chapter in the entire book of Daniel. And the reason for that is because as we go into the prophecy in chapter 11, it is so detailed and goes into so much future history that modern critics of the Bible say this just can't be written when it says it's written. In the first year of Darius, it is so detailed, and so much of the detail happens in history that it must be written way later. So for those of us who believe in a God who is able to give us the future, we take this and go, wow, this is amazing because of the prophecy of the four kingdoms, right? Now, an overview, the first 36 verses deal with the split of the kingdom of Greece under the king of Greece, this powerful king who is Alexander the Great. And he dies very early, and then his kingdom is split into four kingdoms that are not relatives of his. And it's going to say that. And these four kingdoms of Greek history constantly fight with each other. We have the kingdom of the north, which is Syria and the Mediterranean. And then we have the kingdom of the south, which is Egypt. We have the kingdom of the east, which is Thrace and Asia Minor. And then kingdom of the west, which is still in Greece. But I want to ask us a question. As we go in this, you've read it in advance. One of the tendencies we have as modern readers is we start to read this and we get all excited about who was the four kingdoms, when did this guy become king, and what did he do, and all the details of the battles between these kingdoms and who won what, and contract marriages that fail, and then the kids come from another marriage that isn't even part of that contract marriage. We have a tendency, Kyle, to read all these details and get real excited about the history that we have, because we are readers from after the history has been fulfilled. But one of the rules of inductive Bible study is we have to stop and ask ourselves the question, what was the meaning for the people that were reading it right then? Because when Michael is explaining this to Daniel and giving all these details, Daniel had no clue of the name of these kings and the kingdoms to come.
Yeah.
So we have to ask ourselves the question, why are these verses here? And what did they say to Daniel and to the people that were reading it right then? Now, what we have a tendency to do, Kyle, is we start to read this and we get into the weeds of all these kingdoms and who these people were and their dates. It reminds me of, remember when we did back the chapter on the statue of the kingdoms, that we got all excited about this kingdom was from there to here, and all. They didn't know that when they were reading it.
Yeah, so we can't put the modern lens on.
Exactly right.
You.
But we need to ask ourselves the question, why are these verses here for Daniel? Remember, he was praying about what's going to happen to the nation after the Babylonian captivity and Persia's in. Now, what's going to happen? And last chapter we saw that Gabriel is really giving him insights, and he's assisted by Michael, who's keeping the prince of Persia and the prince of Greece at bay while Gabriel is explaining things to Daniel. So as we go here, I'm going to really skip ahead and I'm going to get to what I think the point of what was written for Daniel and not get in the weeds of all of these details. Now, we know that this is a prophecy for two things. Number one, the time is set for us. In the first verse of chapter 11, which really belongs to chapter 10, but the first verse, it nails it down that this was written when Darius was the king of Persia. This was written before the king of Greece came. It was written before Greece broke up into four kingdoms. It was written before that. And one of the things that I did was I did a word study on the word will. When it says, I will do something, what's the tense?
Future.
Future tense. In fact, I did a word study just between verse 2 and verse 35, and the word will is written 86 times.
Wow.
In those 35 verses. Okay? So you go, you look at that and you go, gee, I wonder if the idea of what God is going to do is a theme.
Yeah, maybe.
From Daniel's perspective, the message Daniel is receiving is God is going to do some things. And God is going to do some things that are very detailed. Now, what assurance would that give for Daniel reading this when the angel says, this is what God's going to do?
Yeah, even if you look back, he starts off, he's distraught, he's wondering what's going to happen, and now seeing, okay, God is not just working in a general sense, but I can trust he's working in a detailed way, and he's got things.
Now, in the last chapter, he talked about that Babylon was going to pass away, Persia was coming in, and God had a plan for Persia. And now he's going to basically explain God also has a detailed plan for what's going to happen after Persia. All Daniel needs to know is, don't worry, God will do some things, and God has got it, right? It's in God's hand. He's fully capable of doing very detailed things, maybe details that Daniel doesn't even understand quite fully. As history happens, we have the advantage of going, wow, to the point where liberal theologians say, this can't be prophecy because it's so stinking detailed. But from Daniel's perspective, the reassurance he's getting is God can, God will. And then there's a question that's a statement that's all through this, that we'll see God will divide up this Alexander the Great's kingdom into four kingdoms. They're going to war with each other. There's going to be all this intrigue and warfare and all these battles leading up to, and we're going to skip. I would recommend, if you're really interested from the perspective of a current reader who's going to get a perspective of history, I would suggest you go to some good commentaries. I read probably 6 commentaries, and they all go into the details of, oh, this was Ptolemy, and this is Egypt, and this is when their so-and-so's daughter is going to marry him, and then all of that stuff. They go into that in great detail. And if you're interested, I would advise you to go to these commentaries and read through those details. And they'll be a blessing because we've seen in history those details come so true that we go, wow. Daniel didn't have that. When Gabriel is speaking to Daniel, what is he doing when he says, this will happen? What is he doing for Daniel?
He's providing assurance and helping Daniel trust God in the midst of what seems to be some chaos.
Yeah, and basically saying, God has got a plan, and it's a detailed plan, and he knows exactly what he's doing, right? Then it moves us, and I'm going to jump all the way down to verse 29, because between verse 29 and 35 is when there's a challenge that, in light of all that detail, we need to ask ourselves some questions based upon the early part of chapter 11, okay? So permit me to take the lead here and jump ahead. And I want to show you, first of all, let's go to these verses. I just want to show you what I did here with the beginning. If you notice the word will, and I counted them 86 times. And my conclusion was, God's got this, okay? I may not know what the this is, but God's got it. So by faith, I could say, wow, God has got these details planned out, and he knows exactly a mighty king will rise. His kingdom will be broken up and parceled out into 4 points of the compass. And if you look down, here are the wills in that. And then it flips over. We go over to this page, and I want to just show you on this page. Look at the wills.
Wow. This 2 to 3 for every verse almost.
Yeah, 86 times in 35 verses there's a lot.
Yeah.
So I went through and I just looked at that. And it continues on. He's been saying this will happen, this will happen. And then verse 29 says, at the appointed time, he will return and come into the south, but this time it will not turn out the way it did before, because, and this is historical details, the ships of Kittim, which is Cyprus, they come down against him. Therefore, he will be disheartened and he will return. And what happens? Read the rest of verse 30.
And become enraged at the holy covenant and take action. So he will come back and show regard for those who forsake the holy covenant.
Now, let me ask you a question. This is saying at the proper time, which has been talking about the proper time is this will happen. And at the proper time of this detailed plan, this king is going to turn against the covenant. Now, what's the covenant?
Would it be a placeholder for Israel? Turn against Israel?
The covenant people, okay? And this is all the covenants of God, from the Abrahamic covenant of I'll make you a great nation and you're going to be a blessing to the world, and to the Mosaic covenant of I'm going to bring you out of Egypt, to the Davidic covenant of I will establish a kingdom that will last forever through the Messiah. So you have all these covenants between God and his people that make them a covenant people and make us a covenant people. When we read the New Testament, we who were not a people have become the people of God, because we've been grafted in as part of the covenant people, right? So all of a sudden here, this king is defeated in battle and he retreats, and then he gets enraged at God's people. So he will return and become enraged at the holy covenant and take action. And he will come back and show regard for those who forsake the holy covenant. So what's that saying is that when he comes back, what?
He props up people in Israel who've forsaken God.
Exactly. If for people of Israel who forsake the covenants, he has regard. He shows favor. And we know at the end times, this is going to be more prophecy, there are going to be people in Israel that forsake God. So now we're getting into some questions here. Me as a covenant person, Daniel, when he reads this, he's going to say, I'm a covenant person. So what is this saying for me? There's a king coming that's going to really come down on the covenant people of God. Daniel has been asking, what's going to happen in the future to my people? Well, what's going to happen is God's going to work out the details of history, and it's not going to be pleasant for Israel coming up. All right? Read from verse 31 down to 33.
Forces from him will arise, desecrate the sanctuary fortress, and do away with the regular sacrifice. And they will set up the abomination of desolation. By smooth words, he will turn to godlessness those who act wickedly toward the covenant. But the people who know their God will display strength and take action. Those who have insight among the people will give understanding to the many. Yet they will fall by the sword and by flame, by captivity and by plunder for many days.
Back in 31, it says, this guy comes in and he sets up the abomination of desolation. When they set up the statue of Zeus in the temple and sacrifice a pig, to Zeus. All Daniel knows is he's going to come in and he's going to do something that's going to be an abomination to God.
Yeah.
He's going to do away with the regular sacrifice. And then 32, by smooth words, he will turn to godlessness those who act wickedly towards the covenant. So if Jews or Gentiles, if they have a tendency to not cherish the covenant, but act wickedly towards God and the God of covenant, he's going to have smooth words for them and help them really turn away from God. Okay? So now this is a prophecy of the future. This isn't yet the tribulation period. This is, in fact, the rest of the chapter from verse 36 to verse 45 is about that last tribulation week. Gabriel is going to explain that to Daniel. But this is before that happens. There's going to start to be pressure on God's people. And let's look at this, because here's where we get the challenge. By smooth words, he turns to godlessness those who act wickedly towards the covenant. But, and who are the but? The people who do what?
Who know their God.
And what are they going to do while this pressure is being turned up?
They display strength, they take action, and they have insight to teach others about God.
Okay. So I can ask myself the question, and Daniel asked himself the question, in the midst of a culture that's not pleasant towards God's covenant, am I a person who takes action? Am I a person who holds? Look at the wording in that verse. And I ask myself the question, do I display strength and take action in a world that makes fun of my covenant? God has got all these details. He's working all this out. And he says, and it's leading up to a point where you can ask yourself the question, are you a person of covenant who is strong and takes action? Then it explains what the action is in the next verse. And what's the action? Do I sit and say, boy, I'm so glad I'm a person of covenant and I'm going to be blessed by God in the end? What's the action? Verse 33.
The action's to evangelize, to bring other people into the fold.
That's right. Even in the midst of the verse, into that verse, they will fall by the sword and by flame, by captivity, by plunder for many days. So the faithful are going to suffer. When we are in the midst of trials, we can ask ourselves the question based upon the fact that God will work this out. I need to ask myself the question, will I? God will, but will I? Will I be strong? Will I be faithful? Will I be active? So a lot of people thinking about end times go, oh man, and they just sit in fear. We should be sharing our faith. We should be telling people about the God of covenant who's given us the covenant of our salvation. And we should be out there, even if it kills us.
Yeah.
And I think that's the message to Daniel. And it's the message that I want to take away from these verses, Kyle. That I can be assured God's in charge. I want to make sure that when things are tough and the trials are on God's people, that I, as a covenant person, want to be strong and active in that I want to give my insights to as many people as I can. And you look at the words, the word in verse 33, those who have insight. And what has Gabriel given to Daniel? Insight.
Given an insight.
And what has he given to us? Insight.
Insight.
And so those who have insight, which I am included in, among the people, and these are the covenant people of God, will give understanding to the many. That is a call to ministry.
Yeah, ministry we can ask even in the suffering.
Go ahead.
It's a call to ministry even in the suffering, like you were saying with the rest of that verse.
Yeah.
It's not an easy call.
It's not going to be all blessings and bliss and I'm going to be healthy, wealthy, and wise because God's doing great things for the covenant people. No, what he's doing for the covenant people is allowing them to be strong because of insight, and then saying, now that you have the insight, you need to be sharing that insight with as many as you can, even though you are suffering trials. And I think that's the takeaway from this portion of chapter 11. You see where I'm going on this? Now, does that make sense? Does that make sense from the perspective of the reader who does not have that historical view that we have?
Yeah, so it's not, the point isn't to try to come to it and figure out how it all fits into history, although that can be a blessing still to look back. The main point is, hey, God's got it. God will do these things. Now it's up to us to, in the midst of those difficult things, share the gospel with people, minister to people.
I asked myself the question, I wrote it right here in my margin, large and in charge. Will I display strength and take action? Will I share my insight into Bible study with other people? And then ask the question, not only will I, but am I?
Mm-hmm.
That's my application, the takeaway. If you keep reading 34 and 35 very quickly. Now, when they fall, they will be granted a little help, and many will join them in hypocrisy. So there's going to be a bunch of covenant people who, even though we're sharing the insight, many are going to fall and join the hypocrisy that we see in verse 32, this smooth talking hypocrisy of turning themselves against the covenant people. And then at the end, some of those who have insight will fall. In other words, I'm going to share insight with people who just refuse to get it. Now, that doesn't mean I stop sharing the insight. It just means that I know not everybody I give the gospel to is going to receive Christ. My point is, am I strong and am I taking action to be true to my covenant? Some of those who have insight will fall in order to refine, purge, and make them pure until the end time, because it is still to come at the appointed time. At the appointed time, who's doing the appointing?
God.
And I could say, God has this. He will take action, and he takes detailed action. So in the midst of that detailed action, I can be strong based upon that promise. And I can go through trials while I'm sharing my insight with others, as many people as possible, because that is going to help purge me. It's going to help purify me. Why? Because I'm being strong and taking action during the trials to come. And why can I do that? Because God has given me assurances that he's got it.
Some who have insight will fall,
but
in the midst of falling, that God's using that even
to purify others.
To purify, yeah.
So I'm going to share it with many. Some are going to fall, but some will be purified and will really turn to the covenant. And all of this, basically the last word he's given here in this section, Gabriel is basically saying, Daniel, God's got this. So be busy, be active for the rest of your life, because history is going to unfold and God's got that history. And what God wants from you is, will you take action based upon the promises that God's got it?
Yeah.
And that's a huge challenge for me. And I take that away rather than get in the weeds of all the historical, oh yeah, this was here. I can say, God is basically saying to Daniel, I will do all this. Now you be strong and be active. Address the covenant people of God with the details of the covenant that can purify them and make them righteous.
Yeah, it's a really good challenge.
And we can take that. I know that people that were all excited about chapter 11, just like they were about the Statue of Kingdoms, they'll be all disappointed because we didn't get into the weeds. I don't think the weeds were meant as a message to Daniel. What was meant was, I will do it. You get busy and be ministering until the appointed time. And I'll let you know when the appointed time comes. Now, next week, we're going to get into, from verse 36 to the end of the chapter, is all about an explanation of the 70th week. This is more detail about the 70th week. And you can say, from our perspective, this hasn't happened yet, but we can have assurance that the details of it is going to happen. Why? Because the details of what he's just been talking about have happened.
We're in between verse 35 and 36.
We are a people who have the blessings of having one foot in each camp. We have a historical background, but not enough yet. But we can take assurance from that historical background that know that God's going to also work out the details of the last 7 years. So we'll talk about that next week. Hope this has been a blessing to you. It was a blessing to me. And even though we skipped some verses, I think we got the idea of what those verses were really about. We've been talking about what God is going to do in the future. I want to recommend a video to you. It's called The Bible Enlightens Us During Trials. It's out of Psalm 119. I think you'll be blessed. If you are, be sure to hit the like and subscribe. And I'd love to hear your comments. Be sure to do that. And we're going to continue in our study in Daniel next week. And until then, God bless you.